I moved into the Oxford Apartments in Milwaukee in 1990. I was 23, freshly out of school, working a job I didn't love but pretending to like. Rent was cheap, the neighborhood was quiet enough, and I didn't mind the old building. Sure, it had roaches and the hallway light flickered like something out of a horror movie, but it was home. Always gave a nod when passing. Once, he helped me carry in a box of groceries when my arms were full, and I remember thinking how odd it was that he had no expression, like his face didn't know how to smile. Still, I thanked him, and he just mumbled something and went back inside. Apartment 213 was right across from me. Guy who lived there kept to himself. Jeffrey, that was his name. It was metallic, sweet, almost like roadkill baking in the summer heat. I called maintenance twice. They told me someone had probably left meat out or something died in the walls. Then they told me to light a candle. Once I heard what sounded like a saw. Another time there was a thud, like something heavy dropping on tile. Except I couldn't tell if it was him whispering to himself or to someone else. I even put my ear to the wall. I wish I hadn't. Nervous. Maybe 18, 19. I asked if he was looking for someone, and he said, "My friend lives here." I paused, knocked, nothing. I pushed gently, out of instinct, just to close it, and that's when the smell hit me full force. I staggered back and called out his name. Nothing. "I think his name's Jeff," I pointed to the door. He thanked me and walked inside. I never saw him come out. I finally convinced myself to report it. He didn't talk much, but he was polite. He said he'd look into it, but you could tell he thought I was exaggerating. Then came the smell. At first, I thought it was the trash chute. Something always got caught in there. But this was different. He answered calmly, even laughed with them. Then one of them stepped inside and didn't come back out for several minutes. When he did, he was pale, like ghost white, still does. Because all those nights I'd hear whispers. Sometimes I wonder if one of them was calling for help. If one of those guys was still alive, waiting, praying someone would knock. But it kept coming back, stronger, especially late at night. One evening I was walking down the hallway and saw the guy from 213 struggling with a big blue drum. Because no one believed me about the smell, about the sounds, and I didn't believe myself either until it was too late, like one of those plastic barrels. He looked sweaty and pale, even for him. Watching him drag that barrel, smiling that strange, lifeless smile. I offered to help, but he froze like I'd caught him doing something wrong. In that barrel, he cooked them, photographed them, talked to them. I opened my door just a crack and caught a glimpse inside, just a blur of a kitchen, but I saw the fridge. Its door was open, and inside. I can't describe it. Then he smiled, the first time I'd ever seen it. It didn't reach his eyes. He dragged the barrel inside, and I went back to my place, creeped out but not suspicious enough to call the cops. "Nah," he said, "just fish, bad batch, stinks." I laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, man, it really does." That was it. Then came the noises. Late at night, always past midnight, I'd hear a low hum, like machinery. Sometimes it'd stop and start again. There was breathing, labored, then what sounded like whispering. One night I saw a young man outside our building, just pacing. That happened more than once. Different guys, always young, always alone. None of them looked like neighbors. And then, one morning, I passed Jeff's apartment, and the door was slightly open. Not enough to see inside, but just cracked. It wasn't just bad, it was unnatural. Like rust and rot and chemicals, all blended into something primal. I shut the door quickly. My stomach turned all day. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that door, about that smell, and the look on his face when he smiled. I called the building manager and told him everything: smells, noises, strange guests. It wasn't until a couple weeks later, when the cops actually showed up, that I realized I wasn't crazy. I watched from my peephole as 2 officers knocked on his door. More cops came, and then the news vans. They carried out bags, boxes. Cameras flashed. One officer came out and vomited on the grass. Later, I learned that Jeffrey had been killing for years. Right there, behind the door across from mine, he kept parts. In the fridge. The guy who helped carry my groceries once had skulls in his closet. Literally, it haunted me. But I didn't. I lit a candle and went to sleep. Even now, decades later, I won't live in an apartment with shared walls. I don't trust what might be behind them. They tore the building down. But sometimes in dreams I'm back there, standing in that hallway. And the worst part, I smiled back. They always said the woman next door was kind. She watched neighborhood kids, baked cookies, went to church. It was the kind of place where kids ran barefoot and parents didn't lock their doors. Safe, or so we thought. But behind her smile and the smell of biscuits, something was rotting in that house, and it had a name. Gertrude, the mom, was a frail-looking woman, always coughing, always smoking. But she had a way about her people trusted her. Polite. Sylvia used to wave to me when we passed each other on the way to school. She had this soft voice and carried herself like she didn't want to be a bother. But then she stopped showing up, and when she did, she had bruises. Quiet. I told my parents the next morning, and they brushed it off. Stay out of other people's business, my father said. They were dropped off one afternoon by their parents, who worked with the carnival, I think. Cops, medics, neighbors standing outside in their robes. Something had happened at the Banishevsky house. Traveling. They just needed a place for the girls to stay a few weeks. They found her in the basement, naked, bruised, burned, starved. She had over 150 wounds. Cigarette burns. Carvings. They'd written things into her skin with needles. Her fingernails were broken, teeth chipped. Or that creeping feeling in my gut that something was wrong. They tried to forget, paint over the memory. But you can't erase what happened. Not when it was that close. Not when it was right next door. Beat her. Mocked her. Took turns, called it a game. One of the younger kids cried, said he didn't know any better. I saw a flicker of movement through the basement window, just for a second. We all knew something was wrong. We just didn't want to believe it. A figure thin and hunched, with arms wrapped around herself like she was cold. She looked up and I swear our eyes met. Hers was swollen, like she hadn't slept in days. Sylvia, in dreams, in reflections, in empty windows. Not angry, just tired. Tied up, forced to bathe in scalding water, made to sleep on a cold cement floor. When she tried to escape, they dragged her back. When she begged for help, they laughed. Gertrude agreed, said it'd be good for her own daughters to have company. She had a bunch of kids, and somehow still managed to take care of other people's children, too. The house was always full, always loud. I grew up in Indianapolis, in a neighborhood that looked like any other in the 60s. White fences, trimmed lawns, the occasional ice cream truck jingling by. The Banishevsky house was 3 doors down from mine. No more walks, no more waves, no school. One of my friends, Tommy, said he heard screaming from the Banishevsky basement one night. High, panicked, like someone being hurt. His mom told him it was probably just one of the kids playing, but he said it didn't sound like playing. I remember when Sylvia and her sister Jenny moved in, 2 pretty girls. At first it seemed fine. One time I saw her at the corner store with Gertrude's daughter, Paula. Sylvia had a busted lip. I asked if she was okay, and Paula snapped. She fell before Sylvia could say anything. I laughed it off. You know, kids get rough, but then it kept happening. It got worse. We stopped seeing Sylvia altogether. I never told anyone this before, but once I snuck behind their house. I don't even know why. Curiosity, maybe. That night I couldn't sleep. But Sylvia didn't come back, not for school, not for anything. Then came the ambulance. It was October 1965. I remember the sirens because they broke the usual hum of our street like a punch to the chest. Word spread fast. Sylvia was dead, and the part that made it all worse, Gertrude did it. Her own kids helped. Even other neighborhood children joined in. She died begging for help. They said her last words were, "I'm going to die." I can tell. The trials were the first time we heard the full story. Sylvia had been denied food, beaten daily. Gertrude stood in court and looked bored. Paula, who was pregnant, acted like none of it was her fault. We knew that house was torn down eventually. No one wanted to live there. Sometimes I still see her face, because the worst monsters aren't the ones that hide in the dark. They're the ones who smile and bake and live 3 doors down. She looked like any grandmother, soft-spoken, white curls pinned neatly. The kind of woman who made you tea without asking and pressed $1 into your palm for snacks. But behind her floral aprons and neatly trimmed roses, something unspeakable festered beneath the dirt. Because in that house on F Street, people disappeared. I was a social worker in Sacramento in the late 1980s. I worked mostly with the elderly people who had no family left, or those too ill or poor to live alone. He was 65, formerly homeless, with no family and early signs of dementia. Quiet, polite, just wanted a bed, hot meals, and someone who didn't treat him like he was invisible. I brought him to Dorothea's house myself. She made him soup, tucked him in. Bert never mentioned family, never had a suitcase. When I left, he smiled bigger than I'd ever seen. A woman, this time Alice, mid-70s, suffered from severe arthritis. Moved into Dorothea's with 3 suitcases and a walking cane, a 2-story Victorian near downtown. Old, yes, but charming. Both vanished without warning. No goodbye. No phone call. No trace. I started to get a feeling tight in my chest, like a string pulling taut. Something was wrong. Loose shutters, a white picket fence, a little welcome mat that said, "Bless this home." And Dorothea herself, she was warm. The kind of woman who called everyone honey, who baked fresh cookies for my first visit and insisted I take some with me. "I spoil my tenants," she said with a wink. "Their family. Packed up and left in the middle of the night. My job was to check in, find housing, help them sign up for assistance programs. That's how I found Dorothea Puente's boarding house." So when someone like Dorothea offered room, meals, a quiet home to someone on disability, it felt like gold, neat as always. Cushions fluffed. She hesitated, then said he was out at the store. Magazines stacked just so. But something felt different, heavier. I asked to see the tenant list. She said the man they were asking about over Montoya, another tenant, had left suddenly. But the officer didn't buy it. He asked to look around. She refused. He came back the next day with a warrant. It wouldn't be the first time a client wandered off without telling anyone. Peaceful, sick. I knew some of those names. I'd placed them there. I had brought them to her door. At first glance, it was everything I hoped for. She said she'd seen Dorothea outside in gloves, even in the rain. She had already begun the process, again, pretending to be someone she wasn't, offering a room, a warm meal, companionship. It was hard to find placements back then. Budget cuts, rising homelessness, disappeared. I placed a man named Bert with her. 2 weeks later, I called to check on him. During the trial, she claimed innocence. Said the tenants had died naturally. Said she was just burying them out of respect. "Oh, Bert," she said, pausing just a little too long. "He had to go. Something about a cousin in Oregon. That seemed strange." He took notes. I spent years wondering, what if I'd pushed harder? Asked more questions? What if I hadn't ignored the strange silences, the way her stories never lined up? Promised to send someone by. I asked if he'd left a forwarding address. She said no. Still, I had other cases, other fires to put out. I told myself maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe he really did leave. Sharp teeth, wild eyes, blood on their hands. Then it happened again. Gone, Dorothea told me 3 weeks later. Said she wanted to move south, warmer weather. Gone, just like Bert. 7 tenants. 7 people no one had been looking for because she had been cashing their social security checks, signing their names, and telling everyone they'd moved. That was 2 people in a matter of months. I visited again. Dorothea greeted me with a smile and banana bread. "You're working too hard, honey," she said, setting a slice in front of me. "You need to slow down." I looked around the living room. "Just me and 3 others now," she said cheerfully. "Quiet lately." I asked for names. She gave them. I asked to speak to one Tom, a man I'd never met. I came back the next day. Tom was napping. The day after that, out on a walk. By the 4th visit, I'd had enough. I called the police. Not because I had proof, there was none, but because something in my bones told me there was more to this sweet old woman than knitted blankets and pie crust. The officer I spoke with listened politely. That visit changed everything. It started with a welfare check. Dorothea answered the door, calm and collected. She smiled, she joked. They didn't find Alvaro inside. But in the backyard, behind the flowers and the bird bath, the soil was unusually soft. A detective dug. Then he stopped. Called for backup. They unearthed a leg. Then more. By the end of the week, 7 bodies had been pulled from Dorothea Puente's yard. I was numb. One of the neighbors said they remembered the smell earthy, sharp, chemical. Dorothea had always blamed it on fertilizer. Another neighbor recalled hearing digging late at night. When police confronted her, she didn't run. She didn't cry. She offered tea. But a few days later, while under surveillance, Dorothea vanished. Took off in a taxi. They found her in Los Angeles, sipping coffee in a motel lobby, chatting with an elderly man. She was brought back to Sacramento and charged with multiple counts of murder. The jury didn't believe her. She was convicted of 3 murders. Prosecutors suspected she'd killed many more. She died in prison in 2011, old, gray, with that same soft smile. But the guilt didn't die with her. Not for me. People talk about monsters like they're easy to spot. But Dorothea Puente wore pearls. She baked pies. She read scripture at community meetings. She was everything society tells you is safe. And that's what made her terrifying.